Hi, and welcome to Chapter 6, Perception and Individual Decision Making. So in this chapter, we're going to be talking about perception all the way down to decision making. Now, perception is really a process in which it's sort of the way people organize all the massive amount of information they receive into patterns and give it some sort of meaning. So people are going to use their perceptions of reality, and that may not actually be reality, but they use their perceptions to form their own reality and decide how to behave. So some people, you may have noticed, have sort of their perceptions of reality are different than your perceptions of reality. So because what is real, we can only comprehend it by what our perceptions are, and sometimes we get that wrong. And that's what makes perception tricky, because it's different for everybody. So people will see events and judge differently what they're perceiving and what's happening, depending on their environment, their history, experiences, past experiences. This all affects your perception, which in turn affects your behavior. So factors influencing perception, there are many factors, of course. The factors are either in the perceiver, such as attitudes and experience in the person, or in the situation, such as social setting and time, or in the target, such as sound, the size, or background. So these are three inputs that are going to contribute to our perception. And I think we all, if you kind of break the perception down into those three areas, you can kind of see, because each perceiver is different in different walks of life, different experiences, and the situation that something could occur, whether it's occurring at work or at home or in public, these are different situations. So certain perceptions are skewed a little bit depending on the situation and also on the target. Okay. Let's talk about attribution theory. So attribution theory suggests that perceivers try to attribute the observed behavior to a type or cause, and the two big causes are internal or external. So attribution theory helps us to understand our perceptions about others. Research has shown that our perceptions about others are based on assumptions we make about them. So the attribution theory says that when we observe behavior, we try to determine if it's internally or externally driven. And if it's internally driven, it's under the person's control. Whereas if it's externally driven, it's not under the person's control. So say, for example, you're going to meet somebody at the movies and they were late. So that could either be an internal or external reason. An internal reason, maybe they're late because they took a nap, or because they were slow getting ready, or because they didn't understand the time we were supposed to meet. External could be there was a traffic jam on the way to the movie theater, or there was an issue where they couldn't get transportation. So those are kind of the difference between internal and external. Now, determinants of attribution, we can use three factors to help us decide if behavior is internally or externally controlled. So distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. So distinctiveness shows different behaviors in different situations. So it's really whether the individual displays behavior in different situations and the uniqueness of the act. Consensus looks at the response and compares it to others in the same situation to see if it's consistent with the behaviors of others. And consistency looks to see if the response is the same over time. So if you're judging somebody, you want to see, you want to get an idea of, say someone at work, say someone calls in sick to work. So you want to know that, is this a distinct, unique behavior or situation, and probably not distinct situation. Consensus, look at the response compared to everybody. So does everybody who faces a similar situation respond in the same way? So basically, when people feel ill, do they all call in sick, or does some come to work sick? And consistency, does the person respond the same way over time? So this is a person who over time is rarely uses sick days and generally uses when they're legitimately very sick. So these are just some ways of trying to break down whether it's internal or external. Okay, so other determinations, to break these determinations of attribution down, we could look at the elements of the attribution theory and helps us make a connection between external and internal. So if we look at, we have the individual's behavior that we could break out into distinctiveness, consensus, and consistency. And then we can do sort of, is it a high chance or a low chance? So if it's highly distinct, that's most likely external. If it's low on the distinction level, it could most likely be internal. If the consensus is high, we consider that more external. If the consensus is low, more internal. And consistency, if the consistency is high, it's internal. If consistency is low, that would be considered external. So this would really be, it's just for a map to look at these different elements and apply them to a situation to really get an idea if the factors are driven by external events, which would be the environment, or internal events with the person. Okay, there are some errors that can occur with attribution. So the errors and biases, in the attributions we make. But first, we often tend to underestimate the influence of external factors and overestimate the influence of internal factors. This is called the fundamental attribution error. The next common error is the self-serving bias. This bias exists when individuals attribute their own successes to internal factors and blame external factors when they don't succeed. So their success is something they own based on what they did, and when they fail, oh, this person got in my way, or there was a red light, or they make excuses that are external in nature. And culture plays a role in attributions people make. Western cultures tend to focus on the individual, while Asian cultures tend to focus more on the group. Okay. Let me just shrink this a bit. Okay. Shortcuts used in judging others. So there are some frequently used shortcuts in judging others. People will utilize past experiences, their attitudes, and their interests to interpret information on their own biases, often misperceiving the situation. So judgment can utilize a halo effect. So when individuals are drawn favorable impressions about an individual using a single characteristic. So a halo effect, maybe you meet someone and they're attractive. So automatically you think, oh, they're a good person. You make all these other assumptions based on this one characteristic. Now, contrast effect occurs when we make judgments about an individual and compare them to other individuals we have recently encountered. So we're sort of contrasting. So the reaction is influenced by other encounters. Stereotyping is when we judge someone on the basis of perception of the group to which he or she might belong. So these are some shortcuts make in judging other people that generally these shortcuts lead to bad judgments or inaccurate judgments. Okay, a link between perception and decision making. So if you're going to make good decisions, you need to have good perceptions. So in organizational behavior, we are concerned with how decisions are made, and perceptions play a significant role in that process. Our decision making occurs as reaction to a problem or a perceived discrepancy between the way things are and the way we would like them to be. A decision is then made based on various alternatives that have been developed from the data collected. So perception influences the entire process from the problem recognition to the data selection to the alternative being chosen. So you can see how perception all throughout the decision-making process has a huge influence. Okay, so a rational decision-making model. This would be, if you want to be rational, this would be a model to use to make decisions. So first, it would say to define the problem, and then identify decision criteria, allocate weights to the criteria, develop alternatives, evaluate the alternatives, and select the best alternative. So that's sort of a model that sometimes if you have a hard decision to make, maybe you go to pen and paper and you write down, here, here's the problem, here's the different decisions I could make. Then I could put a weight based on how important these different criteria are, and then develop alternatives and evaluate them hopefully leading to selecting the best alternative. Sort of when you make that list and you say, okay, pro and con of a situation or decision, it's, the model is seldomly actually used, but the goal, it's a good understanding of how to structure your decisions. And there are other models that can help us think through decisions in that we need to make, especially in an organizational setting. But this is sort of a step-by-step model that could be used. It's a good model and it's goal-oriented. Okay. Assumptions on the model. Now, these are the assumptions we need to make. This model assumes that the world is perfect, and that these decisions would require a perfect world in order for them to work. So it assumes we have complete information, every option has been identified, and there's a maximum payoff on the ultimate decision. So the problem is, we don't always know everything about the situation. We don't always know all our options, and we usually have a hard time figuring out what is the best decision. As far as when we say seeking highest utility, we mean maximum payoff. Okay, bounded rationality. So the second thing we're going to look at is this bounded reality, and it represents more of the real world. How can I say this? It seeks solutions that are best given the information available. So basically, bounded rationality constructs simplified models that identify essential features from the problems without getting overly complex. So this bounded rationality is looking, okay, let's simplify the situation and then seek solutions that are going to satisfy the simplistic model. And what limitation is, we're not really capturing all the complexities of the situation, the problem, or the people involved, so it's not always the best decision-making tool. Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about the three key steps in the bounded rationality decision-making, which is more a simplistic process, like I said before, than the rational decision-making model, which had 6 steps. So in this model, we would look at limited search for criteria and alternatives. Familiar criteria and easily found alternatives is what we would go to first. Limited review of alternatives, focus on alternatives similar to those already in effect, and selecting the first alternative that's good enough. So so if you think about it this way, you're think about making a decision relatively quickly. So you go and do an internet search, you find the alternatives, you review the alternatives quickly, and you might recognize some that you already utilize, and then you just select which is the best, which is good enough. So that's sort of a model that we may more intuitively use, that when we don't want to spend a lot of time making a decision, or we have to make a decision relatively quickly, this is a model that could do that for you. However, since it lacks reviewing the complexity of the situation and a full analysis, it often doesn't lead to the best choices. Okay, intuitive decision making is another model. We could say the third model. This is a non-conscious process and occurs as a result of your experiences and the need for making quick decisions. So you're not exactly conscious of the process you're using. You're basically using your experiences to make a decision. So if you're in a field where you have to make decisions quickly and you don't have time to pull out a notebook and to write down the 6 steps and to list all the alternatives and to analyze them, this is probably how you would make your decision. In fact, most of our decisions on a daily basis are more intuitive decision making. From deciding, here's a good example. You want to drive somewhere to the mall, so you would decide on the route to go based on your past experiences as what's been the most successful, even though if you took the time to check the traffic channel and analyze a map with the traffic information, you'd see that the route you usually take, which is usually the fastest, today there's an accident and an alternative route would be better. So if you had took more time to analyze the situation rather than going what you intuitively think is best, you would have made a better decision. Okay, common biases and errors. So there's the overconfident bias. Now let me just say there are many biases that can occur. We're going to just talk about a few of them in the decision-making process. The overconfidence bias is very common. It's when individuals believe in themselves too much and their own abilities to make good decisions. So they become overconfident in their decision-making process, and that can set them up to make mistakes. So we've all been overconfident in situations and then realize that we were wrong or we made a bad decision based on our confidence in what was going to occur with it, and kind of skip some steps in collecting information, analyzing data, because we're pretty confident of what we needed to do or what our belief was. An anchoring bias is when individuals make decisions based on the information received first and not the new information received later. So you tend to fixate on some initial information and fail to adequately adjust for additional information later on. So you may get a piece of information that comes in about maybe how good a movie is. You read initial review, or your friend initially tells you, oh, this movie is really good. So you're basing your decision to see the movie based on that, even though afterwards you may have seen some reviews and the reviews weren't as positive. Okay. So the next error is confirmation bias, where during the decision-making process, the individual uses only facts that support his decision. So basically, once you make a decision, you're only looking for information that reaffirms your past choices and discounts new information that contradicts your past judgment. So if you're making a decision, or if you made a decision in the past, you sort of always want to support that decision, and you really have a filter on when it comes to any type of information that would make you seem wrong or incorrect in the past. Okay, availability bias, which involves emphasizing information that is more readily at hand. So information that is more recent and valid. So basically, you're focusing on the low-hanging fruit, the information you get really easily and quickly to make your decision, and not really taking the extra effort to find some of the more difficult to find information. The escalation of commitment error occurs when there is an increasing commitment to a decision despite the evidence that's the wrong decision. So for example, you may have, you start a path to do something, and then you get so far down that path that you realize this was the wrong path to take. This is longer and more frustrating than the other path would have been. But then at that point, you have so much invested, you can't turn around. Maybe it's a relationship that you're in that you say to yourself, well, I might as well just marry this person, even though I know they're not perfect for me or even right for me, but we've been together for so long, I'd hate to start over. Could be an example. Okay, risk aversion is when a decision maker has a tendency to prefer a sure thing over a risky outcome. And most of us seem to be risk adverse. So this is where our perception of risk may not be the actual true risk, but our perception of risk will make us make decisions that aren't always the best. So we might misjudge the riskiness of various options based on our own biases, or and decide on make a decision based on a perception of risk and choosing what's least risky. But the problem is, if you don't have adequate information about the risks, your risk aversion may lead you down the wrong path. Okay, hindsight bias, and this occurs after an outcome is already known and believing it could have been accurately predicted beforehand. So this hindsight bias is, a lot of times you see this in the stock market where, you see certain stocks that did very well or did very poorly, and then after the fact, when they've proven that they're very successful stocks or very poor stocks, then you make a conclusion of the outcome, believing that you could have actually predicted the movement in the stock price in the past, that it was so easy to see. But the truth is, many things aren't easy to see until it's actually confirmed. That's why we have bubbles a lot in financial markets, because during the financial market, no one really realizes the bubble. Then after it pops, all these people come out and say, oh, that was obvious if you look at this and you look at that, and try to take credit for that. Okay. Organizational constraints on decision making. So organizations have constraints to good decision making that create deviations from the rational models we talked about earlier. So managers shape their decisions on performance evaluations, reward systems, formal regulations, and they also base decisions on system-imposed time constraints and historical precedences. So for example, performance evaluations, a lot of organizations will set up a formalized performance evaluation, and this may affect how you make a decision based on knowing how your performance is evaluated. So if you know that your performance is evaluated by evaluations from customers, then your decisions may be more in favor of the customer. So for example, if a customer comes in and they want to return something that you really shouldn't, they shouldn't be returning, it's not right that they're returning it, but you accept it anyway because you want to have a better performance evaluation from the feedback of the customer and make them happier. Reward systems based, your decisions may be based on, say, a commission-based system on these products are getting higher commission than those products, so I'm going to focus on selling these products, and that's your decision based on the rewards. Formal regulations, as far as companies that have they give a lot of details on how you're supposed to do something. As far as how things should be cooked, or when things should be cleaned, or what decisions are appropriate to make. So these regulations actually dictate in these situations this decision you make. System-imposed time constraints, as far as how much time you have to decide, or how much time you have to do. So you can't really decide that I'm going to spend all day on this because the system says I can only spend 20 minutes. Historical precedences is looking at what has been done in the past, and organizations tend to gravitate to what has been done previously to move forward, to make the decisions moving forward. Okay, ethical frameworks for decision making. So ethics should play a role in decision making, and there are 3 ethical criteria that influence decisions. The first is utilitarianism, where the decisions are based on the outcomes of the solution. So it provides the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So we look at what's going to be the outcome, and let's pick the decision that's going to be best for the most people involved, or the biggest gain. The outcome is analyzed based on seeking the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and it is the dominant method for most business people. So it's easy to defend and it's easy to support. The second criteria is rights, where decisions are based on the fundamental liberties and privileges in an attempt to protect the basic rights of individuals, and that's a very good basis for ethical decision making. And the final criteria is justice, where decisions imposes rules in a fair and impartial manner and equitable distribution of benefits and costs. So those are 3 frameworks for making more ethical decisions. Let's talk about how decisions affect creativity in organizations. So better decisions are those that incorporate novel or useful ideas or creativity. So sort of that term, thinking out of the box. The organization will tend to make better decisions when creative people are involved in the process. Often creative solutions can be a win-win for most people. So it's important to identify people who have creative potential in your organization. Some of the methods and theories identified in earlier chapters can help with this process. For example, those who score high in openness and experience tend to be more creative. And, so creativity, you see problems others may not be able to see. You have a better understanding of the problem. You can identify other alternatives and identify alternatives that aren't readily apparent. So if you're creative, and sometimes we're surprised, sometimes we're surprised about how creative children can be at solving problems, because we as fixed adults, we're fixed in our ways and our perceptions and our decisions on how to do things. And then we see a child come along that doesn't have all those experiences and they do something a different way, and you say, wow, that was really a creative way to kind of solve that problem or get around that rule. Okay, so there are the core of this model is creative behavior, and we basically have cause and effect here. So the three-stage model: causes of creative behavior, creative potential, creative environment. And so this will hopefully create creative behavior, where there's they formulate a problem, gather the information, generate ideas, and evaluate the ideas. And then the ideas fall into either it's a novelty, not that useful, or it's useful, something that's going to help the company move forward. So steps in creative behavior. Step 1, problem formulation. So identify what the problem or opportunity is that requires a solution. Information gathering, possible solutions can kind of be thought about in the individual's mind. Idea generation: once you have the problem and the information has been gathered, then you can start generating ideas. And hopefully you evaluate and pick the most useful idea. So that would be a creative process. And I think what happens for a lot of people in today's society is that we lose our creativity, because a lot of people like structure and routine to the point where they don't want to think of better ways of doing things, or they lose their creative spirit. So that can happen quite often in an organization where people are following regulations, following routine, having a very routine schedule and day. They kind of lose sight of that creativity. So it's up to organizations to think of ways to better facilitate and foster environments that are going to create creative behavior. So the causes of creative behavior, big thing here though is motivation. You need to be motivated to be creative, and if you're not creatively mindset or motivated to be creative, you probably won't be creative. So organizations have to create an environment where ideas can flow, and there's a freedom of exchange that encourages creativity, not punishes or puts it down. So the creative potential, the most important predictor of this creative potential would be your expertise. So the more expert you are at something, the more familiar you are with the history, how it works, every component of it, and we're all experts of something in our lives, the more creative we can be in finding a solution, because we know the maximum amount that we could know, and we can already discount a lot of things that won't work just based on how familiar we are with the situation. And of course the environment. If there's a motivation to be creative, if there's rewards and recognition, or even profit sharing in creativity, then it's going to occur more often. So creative outcomes: ideas or solutions judged to be novel or useful by relevant stakeholders. So off-the-wall solutions may be creative, but only if they help solve the problem. So creative ideas do not implement themselves. They have to be translated into creative outcomes, and there's a process which requires utilizing the concepts, addressing the issues, and applying them. So creativity really isn't value unless there's some sort of method or modality to apply the creativity to the solution. Okay, so if you're a manager or if you're an organization with managers, these managers need to think about how behavior follows perception. So to influence employees' behavior at work, you need to assess how employees perceive their work. So if they perceive that their work is too hard or unfair, or they're not, you have to put yourself in the worker's point of view and see what their perceptions are. And that's the only way you can solve problems or make things better for them. Make better decisions by recognizing perceptual bias and decision-making errors. So the more that we open our mind and we realize that we can make perceptual biases, and we ask ourselves, are we thinking about this fairly, adequately? What is our perception, clear? And sometimes talking to other people who have different perceptions can help focus in on the true reality. Adjust your decision-making approach to the national culture that you're operating in. So you have to really understand the culture of the nation, of the state, of the organization, so you can adjust your decision-making approach that fits to that modality. Combine rational analysis with intuition. So both you have a formal rational process for decision-making, but you're also relying on your intuition and your experiences to help hone in on the best solution. And trying to enhance your creativity by, when you come into a situation that isn't ideal or a solution that isn't perfect, you take some time to really creatively think about how it could be better. And that you employ, more people directly involved in the problem and try to create a creative process or creative groupthink that can help better solve the problem. Now keep in mind that people have, inherent biases and perception problems when making decisions. So understanding those biases allows us to make better prediction of behavior. So if we understand people's biases, for example, there's one person that just feels that this particular process is wrong. Maybe it's someone who has a bias that feels that cars to drive themselves is never going to work. So you can kind of understand that in any type of decision-making process, this person is going to come in with a negative bias already. So you have to figure out a way around that. But biases can be helpful. Managers must determine when a bias may be counterproductive. So some biases can actually be helpful for speeding up the decision if they're accurate. Creativity aids in decision-making, which helps to appraise, understand, identify, and solve the problem. So creativity is always a way to solve a problem better than it's been solved in the past. Okay, so in summary, in this chapter, we talked about perception, explained the factors and its influence, particularly how reality is how we perceive it, but what we perceive as reality may not actually truly be reality. And if you've ever known someone that's slightly off and their perception of reality is different than most people, you know kind of what I'm talking about. You can be slightly askew and not fully perceive what's actually happening in some cases. So you have to understand that your perceptions should sometimes be tempered with more inputs and more considerations to make sure your reality perception is close to reality as possible. We explained the attribution theory and described the common shortcuts in judging others. We explained the links between perception and decision making. Contrasted the rational model of decision-making with bounded rationality and intuition. We identified the common decision biases or errors. We explained how individual differences in organizational constraints affect decision-making. We contrasted the 3 ethical decision criteria, and we defined creativity and discussed the 3-stage model of creativity. And we also talked about how managers can apply this to the organization and key things you should keep in mind. Okay, so that is chapter 6. Thank you for your time, and I'll look forward to talking with you for chapter 7.